It was.
Coming out on the left is a rather scraggly-looking group of riflemen, American riflemen. Many of these guys came from the frontier counties, Virginia, Maryland, and especially Pennsylvania. And they're carrying what are known as Pennsylvania long rifles. They are wearing hunting shirts. This is what American farmers and frontiersmen wore as common clothing in those days, made out of homespun linen. Washington in 1776 wanted the entire army to dress like this because it was practical and it was cheap and easy to produce. But it also was somewhat raggedy looking, and instilling discipline in the Continental Forces became an endless problem. And one way that you instill discipline and uniformity is having formal uniforms, believe it or not.
Rebels.
The rifles they're carrying were based on weapons that were brought by German immigrants to Pennsylvania in the early 18th century.
You said Germans.
Now, coming out of the woods, you can barely see them, are Hessian Jägers. Jägers are German riflemen, and the rifles they carry, the Jäger rifle, is the prototype for the Pennsylvania long rifle. The difference is the Jäger rifles are much shorter. The barrels are only about 2.5 to 3 feet long. They are bigger caliber, but they can hit someone pretty accurately at about 200 yards. So think of that as 2 football fields. The Pennsylvania long rifles were made individually by German gunsmiths in Pennsylvania's counties and some Virginia counties, and it varied according to whoever ordered them. Some of them are 5 feet long and some of them are 7 feet long. They also have a small caliber, 45 caliber. A Pennsylvania long rifle, if it's in the hands of a marksman with good gunpowder and a long barrel, can hit somebody between 200 and 400 yards. Whereas a common smoothbore musket carried by the infantry has an accuracy range of 50 or 60 yards, and typically infantry don't fire at one another until they're at least 80 yards apart. One British officer pointed out that as for firing at your opponent at 100 yards with a common musket, you may as well fire at the moon. But here's the difference. The rifles are called that because they have rifling in the barrel. It's screws that are cut to the inside of the barrel and fire down on full twist. What that does is it puts a spin on the rifle ball, so it'll go much straighter. You also get a lot more compression in a rifle. Here's the bad news. The ball fits so tightly down the barrel it requires a greased patch to get it to slide down the barrel more easily, and the rifleman has to carefully force the ball down the barrel. The more you fire the rifle, the harder it gets because the barrel clogs up with burned powder called tallow. Jägers, as you will see, are out on a flank, and they are trained as snipers, but they are not going to make mass infantry rushes at opposing enemy lines. They will snipe and harass and also protect the flanks. But they're very good at taking cover. You can see they're kneeling down. Sometimes they go flat on the ground. British light infantry will also do the same thing. You'll see that demonstrated when they come out. The biggest difference between Pennsylvania riflemen and the German Jägers is discipline. The American frontiersmen don't like being told what to do. They especially do not like officers in fancy clothing who they don't know giving them orders. They tend to get very ornery and defiant. Washington had to deal with this over and over again. If you ever get up to the Museum of the American Revolution, there's a wonderful animated vignette of Washington breaking up a brawl in the camp up in Boston, where a Pennsylvania rifleman and some of the local Massachusetts fishermen ended up having, and Washington had to come out to break up the brawl, and he literally grabbed 2 of these guys by the scruff of the neck and picked them up off the ground and shook them. You don't want to mess with George Washington. He was 6 foot 2 and a half, weighed 209 pounds. The average about 5'7", and depending on the time of year he went on campaign, anywhere from 120 to 150 pounds.
Yeah, no time for nonsense.
Food with the Continental Army was a continuous challenge. guys often went for days without eating anything substantial. Jaegers were trained to follow orders, and again they were gathered from foresters in central Germany, and they had a long street tour. The American riflemen tended to be undisciplined and not very dependable. If they were put into a whole battalion, they could be
The regulars?
Now the British line that is down the bottom of the hill, you'll see on the left side of that line, there's a couple of men standing up in green uniforms. Those are American loyalists. There were about 70,000 Americans took up arms against the United States during the Revolution. The British dressed them originally in on the far bottom end of that British front line, kneeling down our British ladies. They were developed during the French and Indian War after the first big battle of that war, Braddock's defeat with the Battle of Monongahela, 1755, out near Pittsburgh. General Edward Braddock had brought an army of 1,500 British regulars with him, and he was the Coldstream Guards officer himself. But to help guide him out there, we hired a 23-year-old Virginian named George Washington to serve as a volunteer aide, and he promised Washington a commission in the British Army once the campaign was successfully over. Well, that never happened. Braddock's force got attacked about 5 miles from George Washington. Washington kept trying to tell Braddock that it was not cowardice to take cover. The native Americans did it, and as far as the British were concerned, it was savage warfare and cowardly. So Braddock made his redcoats stand in ranks and fire volleys into the woods. The native Americans duck in cover, and then pick the redcoats off.
What's it called?
After 3 hours, 900 British casualties. And then Braddock himself, who was brave as anybody could be,
to staying in
4 horses
character.
shot out. 4 bullet holes in his coat. He took command of what was left of Braddock's force and got it back across the Monongahela River. 2 of the surviving British officers of Braddock's group were brothers, Lord Augustus Howe and his younger brother Billy Howe. They realized the British Army is going to have to develop take cover and scatter and kneel and fall back to the ground. Colonial militia was really scattering, but trying to get them to fight in line. So the Howe brothers are going to create British light infantry. In the American Revolution, young Billy Howe becomes General Sir William Howe, commander of the British Army that attacked New York and Philadelphia. Now, even with this small number of reenactments, look how much it makes. Even on a bright, well, not quite so smoke starts to pile up. This is wore colorful uniforms and carried large battle flags with them. It was so their own men could spot where their commanders could see where different units were, and also let your opponents know which regiments were where. Because just like major sports teams have reputations today, regiments of different armies have reputations. If, for example, in this now main British line coming up with the guns, down at the far end are Scottish Highlanders. If you hear firefights and see Highlanders coming, look out. Their reputation is terrifying. Likewise, you'll see on the middle side of the soldiers dressed in blue. Those are Hessian soldiers, Vernon soldiers, hired by the British. The Hessians had for ferocity in battle. They were extremely well disciplined, and they were formidable opponents. What has happened here is the American riflemen and some American infantry have gotten around the flank.
And an injured.
The British are falling back. Some of them are moving down.
Don't walk into the light.
Come
Don't look into the light. You're gonna make it.
Mike and Hunter.
Get up. Coming across the field on the left are American Continental soldiers. These men are armed with smoothbore muskets. By 1778, most of the muskets we were carrying were Charleville muskets. But Baron von Steuben, when he went to Ballastford, he wrote Austrian, Spanish, a lot of the muskets didn't work. The men were not maintaining them. Steuben is going to introduce the kind of discipline that the army needs.
Such a shame.
At this range, the artillery would be firing what's called break shots. These are small balls in a bag.
Firing.
They would scatter and have a blast for that. At this range, break shot is absolutely effective. While the riflemen and the Jaegers will fire individually, the infantry fire volleys. The reason for that is the gunfire from the smoothbore musket is not that accurate.
Firing.
It has a range, an effective range of 60 to 80 yards. Common soldier can load and fire his
That's one down.
range 3 times a minute. So what they have in accuracy, they make up for in volume.
Another down.
Light infantry tactics regularly in his major battles and beat Washington every time using it. One of the most effective parts of the light infantry was the bayonet. Speed. When the British Army landed on Staten Island in August of 1776, Howe issued in the general orders that he recommended twice, 6 bayonets, and then rushing at the rebels. The rebels won't be able to stand the bayonet attack. He was correct. And early not having proper training with the bayonet charges. Once the Highlanders got their hands on them and pulled out broadswords. After that, anytime they would hear bagpipes or if they saw Hessian troops, because the Hessians in the first battle of the war there, Battle of Brooklyn, annihilated Pennsylvania riflemen with their bayonets. The Hessians had been told by the British that the Americans were savages and were going to cook them and eat them with sauerkraut if they captured them. So the Hessians, not surprisingly, not knowing any better, were pretty ferocious with the Pennsylvanians. One thing that may appear peculiar here, artillerymen who are on both sides, they're both wearing blue uniforms. That was common in Europe. It was a tradition among artillerymen. It didn't matter what country they belonged to, the artillerymen wore blue. The British artillery, to this day, yesterday in the coronation, the Royal Horse Artillery were there, and they were in their blue uniforms on horseback. The American artillery, same thing. They wore, when they got their formal uniforms, they wore typically blue and black coats with red faces. Wondering how do they tell who's who? All you got to do is look at which side of the field you're standing on. Was there occasional confusion? Absolutely.
Firing.
I know it's Hunter, but is that Mike? Is that still?
Yeah.
I said black, but there's another guy with black.
I think it's me.
Firing. Almost fascinating.
The cannons on the field here, folks, are light field pieces, 3-pounders. Continental Army, the largest guns you typically had in any battle.
There were a number of instances.
British Army, on the other hand, depending on which battles we're talking about, mostly also had 4-pounders, but they had lots of 6s and also had 12-pounders. 12-pounders were quite large and extremely loud, if you can imagine. While they'll fire a solid iron ball that weighs 12 pounds. 12-pound shotgun, that's a cannonball. Those larger guns had a range of almost a mile, about 1,500 yards. These little guns were just slightly under that, depending on the elevation of the gun itself and how much powder and the quality of the powder, and also the how humid the air was, because the gunpowder burns according to humidity. One of the biggest mistakes any soldier could make is seeing a cannonball bouncing towards him across the field and putting their foot up to stop it. Because the cannonball is putting up in the air any kind of a moving object like that so it has
We've had worse odds.
Cannonballs don't really have to actually hit anyone to be effective. The sight of one coming at you is kind of like an arrow. At a great distance, you can see them coming, but by the time you realize it's coming at you, it's already hit you. But bouncing cannonballs across the field in what they called indirect fire was a very common tactic. Rattle even the most British are now performing their best. Bayonets were 18 inches long and were triangular. You can see the weapons are all highly polished. On a bright sunny day, they would glimmer and gleam. General Howe told his men in 1776, before the Battle of Brooklyn, that they were to rely on the bayonet, fire only once or twice, and then move double time at the Americans. And they did this again and again. What Baron von Steuben did at Valley was to teach a standard drill to all of the American troops and practice bayonet charging, and also how to form from a column to a line to a column back and forth. So if your opponent rushes you with bayonets, instead of running helter-skelter and breaking up your line, you fall back and move it back. Right near the town of Freehold. The largest battles in the war. It was a hot, miserable summer day. Temperatures in the 90s and over 100. 30 casualties on both sides. Continental Army fought the British Army to a standstill. The battle was a tactical draw. The British evacuated the field that night and continued their march back to New York. Washington held the field.
Hunter can't stay down because it's too much.
Look at these balls in the
You
table.
can imagine how difficult it is to send orders verbally during a battle because of the sheer volume of noise.
The British
The
won.
main purpose of drummers, pipers, and trumpeters was army communication. That said, the rules of 18th century warfare dictated by tradition that musicians are non-combatants. You are not supposed to shoot at them. Both sides used them, and it was considered extreme bad manners to shoot somebody else's drummer or piper. In the British Army, the musicians were usually dressed in uniform coats that were reversed in color. So if a British regiment wore a red coat with white facings, the drummers and pipers wore white coats with red. The Continental Army followed the same tradition. So if you saw properly dressed Continental pipers and drummers, if their regiment wore blue coats with red, they would wear red coats with blue. You can still see this tradition today in the U.S. Marine Band, especially the band that plays at the White House.
Huzzah!
Red tunics with blue sizing, Marine uniforms with red. Tactical demonstration has come to an end with a sweeping British victory across the field. However, we will prevail because of France sending their ships and uniforms and even troops over here. Yorktown in 1781 did not happen without great help. Get the chance this afternoon, folks. The reenactors will be coming back up to the camp. Feel free to speak with them.
I think that was it for the day. I think this is the last one. It takes a lot to do all of it. So next year, come back